All right, everyone, we will go ahead and start. Welcome to this Kendall Hunt webinar, Educators and the Art Experience, Incorporating Visual Art Within Lessons. In this webinar, we will be going over how to incorporate a visual work of art with moving and inspiring questions within a classroom lesson. Before we begin, we'll go over just a few housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded, so you will be receiving access in the coming days, as well as our presenters' contact information. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat and Q&A functions. And at the end, we'll save time to answer all your questions. So now to introduce our speaker, Jeanette Wachtman is an art educator, author, and artist. She received her master's in art education from SUNY at Buffalo. After teaching for over 30 years in the public sector, she retired and continues to teach art education in the School of Art and Design for Kennesaw State University in Georgia. She's received numerous educational grants for developing original cultural programs for the elementary level and presents lectures on this topic at international, national, and state educational conferences for over 25 years. And now I will pass this over to Jeanette.
Am I on?
Yep.
Hi, and welcome to the webinar. Your speaker, Jeanette Wachtman here. Before I get into it, I want to thank Bailey and her team for presenting this webinar. I would like to mention, as Bailey has, that I've been in education for a long time. And I want to let you know that I this is my first webinar, and I'm really excited about presenting it. As she has stated, that I have been an instructor at Kennesaw State University for the last 16 years. And before that, I taught art as an elementary art teacher, also at summer camps, museum workshops, art centers. And of course, my love has always been the young ones. Now, about 14 years ago, I wrote a online course for education majors at Kennesaw. And the focus was to incorporate the visual art within the lessons. And so what happened, and the reason that I am presenting this webinar, is that in 23, last semester, the fall semester, the course was not available to education majors. So here I am thinking I have all this information and I know it has value. So that kind of motivated me to present this presentation to education majors, art teachers, homeschooling parents, classroom teachers, and anyone else who's kind of interested in listening to me present this. The focus that I'm presenting today is to take a work of art plus some art education principles, okay, and bridge it over to a classroom lesson, whether it be science, math, social studies, or language arts, and based upon the subject matter. So I'm going to take you step by step into how that's done. Now, I first need to introduce you to the educational principles that we're going to use. Now, these principles have been around for a long time, since the 70s. And most art teachers use these principles as a core, as the basis for developing their curriculum that they're teaching to their students. The first principle is art production. And we know we're creating a work of art. Art criticism is actually asking questions, and there's 4 basic questions that help you critique a work of art to understand it better. Then you have art history, which explores what humans have expressed throughout history. And then there's aesthetics, and it's an appreciation. We're developing appreciation of beauty, whether it's a work of art or it's a beautiful sunset that you looked at it and you said, wow, where's my camera? So these art principles, you can select any one of them to be incorporated within your lesson. And believe me, it's very easy to do. So let's take a look at what we're going to do today. We're going to take a science lesson and we're going to incorporate a visual art principle of art production. And since it is spring, I decided flowers. It's one of my favorite little lessons. And so this lesson, the students will study flowers and identify the parts of a flower. Now, since we have our subject matter, which is flowers, the next step is that you need to select a work of art. And may I suggest that we go onto the internet, and in the search area, what you need to do is put famous artists painting flowers, still lives, or flowers, painting flowers, flowers painting, along that line. Now, while you're doing this, while you're going and doing this research to select a work of art, and say you come across a webpage and it has 4 different arrangements of flowers, and you select the one, I want you to think about why you selected this one work of art and not another. Because what you're doing is you're going through an aesthetic experience. And why is your energy picking out that one work of art? So what I did, the same thing, that same process. I went on the internet and I put in search famous artist painted flowers. And I came up with quite a few selections, but there was one that really stood out. So let me show you. This struck me right away. It was not only alive and organic, the energy coming from it, and the clarity of the colors. Wait a minute, let me put my cheaters on here so I can make sure oh, there we go. So the clarity of the colors. Look at the wonderful weaving and the texture. Look at the details in the flowers themselves, the petals, the value. Look at we have a dragonfly and we have a butterfly. Just nicely arranged. Now, I'm not aware of this artist, and I'm going to take this out. I can't. Okay. So, oh, sorry about that. This artist was a Dutch 16th century painter. He loved botany. So this artwork is about 400 years old. And he laid the foundation for influencing other artists and painting flowers and fruit. Now, when you select a work of art, I suggest that you select a work of art that has some history to it. And the reason, which I'll explain later, is that you will need that information when we get to one of the other art principles. So now that we have our subject matter, we selected our artwork, let's go into the lesson. Usually you select the artwork, you introduce it to the students, and since we have chosen art production, which will be at the end of the lesson, we are only ask a few questions. Introduce the artwork and the artist, and you might ask a few questions like, do you have a favorite? Do you like flowers? Where do you usually see them? You make it very brief. So after you introduce, you present your science lesson. You can include your videos, real flowers, slides, along that line. And then we have your assessment. Now here is where a lot of the assessments for this particular lesson, you have a worksheet and it has a flower on it and has some lines where the students write in the different parts of the flower and they can color it in. Now, I need to make it real clear that when you have an assessment and the student is using some art materials and they are identifying and they're fulfilling the objective of the lesson, it's called an art task. It is not an authentic art project, okay? So the idea, it's a very valid activity for assessment. So an art task fulfills the objective of the science lesson. It's proving that the students know the content of the lesson. And it's different from an art project. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So it's important for you to understand the difference because an authentic art project has different characteristics. First of all, the art project has the same format and a lesson plan as the classroom teacher. We have our standards, objective procedures, art materials, language, and assessment. However, the difference is this. It's the students and the students' relationship to that work of art, expressing their creativity and their imagination. And it's an original work of art. The students are expressing their feelings and their ideas. That's the difference. So an art task is fulfilling an objective. An art project is child-centered, creativity and imagination centered. And that's what's important. Now, what I'd like to do is to give you a format that you can use anytime that you want to introduce an art project in your class. It's composed of 5 sections, okay? The first section is that you have your subject matter and you have your art project. Now, I'm going to take a break here and talk about how difficult it is when you've been teaching academic data and your left brain is working on that academic area and you say, I've got to shift to be creative and imaginative. And a lot of teachers are like frustrated to move over in that direction from left brain to right brain. So think of it this way. Think about, pretend you're a kid and going, what do kids like? Well, let's see. They love, say for instance, you're teaching geometric shapes. And my favorite is a geometric super robot with 3 superpowers. Or you're taking your geometric shapes and they're designing a spaceship to go to another planet, and they're the astronaut, and make sure we include a constellation up there. Or they're a deep sea diver and they're discovering a sea monster or designing a robot alien. So the idea is that you can jot a lot of things down. Or also, what's important is try to incorporate the student in the activity. They're sliding down a hill in the snow. They're at the, say, a family get together, or they're at the beach, or they're the astronaut. So it's important to take some time and to try to move out of the box, you know. And the more you do it, I think, the more it becomes easier. So that is just some suggestions. Now, as you, as say, a classroom teacher or an instructor, can use this format. And so your parts are this. You're going to set up criteria. You're going to include some art language, and you're going to demonstrate get the students started and give them the steps that they're going to follow, plus you're going to have an assessment. And if you follow this criteria, if you follow this format, it works very well and very succinctly in the classroom. Now, the first criteria for this project is on the board. You can place 5 or more flowers, different sizes, different colors, 3 or more butterflies, 2 or more bugs, 2 or more worms, clouds and sun, and fill up the paper. This is what you've printed up, and you say this is what you need to include in your artwork. Because if you just say to students, our art project I want you to do today is to draw and color a flower garden. Well, they might draw 1 or 2 flowers and put the sun up there. What you want to do is to enhance their experience. This is why you set up criteria. And that's going to be the project we're doing, is a flower garden. And it's going to be with a partner. They're going to have a partner and they're going to work together, a collaborative experience for them. So we have the criteria. And next you need to introduce at least 1 or 2 words of the art language. And since we're working with flowers and it's April and it's springtime, flowers have different shapes. Their petals have different shapes. So some of the flowers have round shapes, oval, zigzag at the ends, or they come to a point. And also, most important is that you provide students with visual resources that they can see there's different shapes. So you've introduced a language. And then the third part over here is that you need to do a demonstration. It's kind of a security blanket where, okay, this is how you start. So you can draw this on the board, or you can have your students stand around you. And on the paper, or on the board, you draw the line and say, this is the ground, this is the sky. And we know our flowers grow from the ground. And so as you're demonstrating, you can draw some flowers and say to the students, you're going to draw with your pencil the flowers first. Then you're going to trace your flowers with a Sharpie and use the Sharpie to add your butterflies, bugs, worms, your sun, and fill up the paper. So while that demonstration is going on, you're giving them the steps to use. Then, as the students are working, what you have done is you've taken the criteria and you've placed it in a worksheet, a checklist. Now, I wish I had used this or known about this idea when I first started teaching, because when I started giving students the checklist and they would be checking off all their steps, they were so proud of themselves. Absolutely, it amazed me. So when you go around and you can see them checking everything off, you can give it a stamp or a star or a sticker saying you did great. And you can hang it up next to the artwork. So with this science lesson, okay, we've introduced an art project. We've selected the artwork. We have the introduction of the lesson. And we have the teachers' participation of introducing the lesson, which is composed of criteria, language, demo, steps, and assessment. Now, try this a few times. It'll get easier. And believe it does get easier. Now, I'd like to show you a work of art done by, this is kindergarten, students. As you can see, they have outlined their stems. We have different shapes of flowers. We have our spiders or bugs, our worms, looks like a caterpillar, and our butterflies. There was a little trick that I would teach my young ones how to make a butterfly. It would be the front part of a B and a 3, butterfly for me. And so you'd see butterflies all over the place after that. And this particular butterfly has rosy cheeks and eyelashes, and so it's obviously a lady butterfly. But isn't this a wonderful piece of artwork? Look, there's a rainbow. They're getting it pretty good. Yes, this is the work that belongs in museums as far as I'm concerned. So this is an example of a lesson on flowers. Now, I've talked about, there's 4 art principles, okay? And let me address how these are used. When you introduce the work of art at the beginning of the class, you can use art history, and you can use it for the younger grades in storytelling. And in a little bit of the upper grades, it could be more informing. That's why I asked you in the beginning to keep the information about the artist and the time it was created. Okay. I have all my teaching career, especially in the elementary, love telling stories because they never forget a story. The brain loves storytelling. So, for example, I can give you an example. Let's see. I'd say to the students, hi, this is an artwork, and the artist is named Brochart. I'm still working on that. And he painted this over 400 years ago, just to let you know. And I'm going to tell you about the artist. Well, one day, Mr. Brochart was in his garden, and he was planting his flowers and his plants, and his son comes up and says, "Gee, Dad, you look very unhappy today. What's wrong?" And Mr. Beauchart says, "Well, I was remembering when I was younger, I used to love to draw and paint flowers, and I kind of miss it." Well, the son says, "Well, Dad, why don't you do that again? I mean, I go outside and play. That makes me happy. And if you like to draw and color flowers and it makes you happy, why don't you do that?" Well, a few days later, the son heard all this noise from the room next door. And so he very quietly opened up the door and he peeked in and he saw his dad's arms moving all directions. And he goes, "I wonder what he's up to." So he sneaks up behind his dad and he goes, "Wow." His dad turns around and says, "Oh, hi." And the son goes, "I didn't know you did painting so well. Oh, I love what you're doing, Dad." Of course, the dad felt very, very proud of himself. And you know what the son did? The son went and told his friends, all right, told his friends, "Come on over and see what my dad is doing." So he lets them all in, and all of his friends are standing behind the dad painting, and they're going, "Wow, Mr. Beauchart, wow, you do a great job of painting." So Mrs. Brochart saw all his friends in there, brought in some lemonade and some cookies, and they had a nice little art party. This is the kind of storytelling that you can involve. That's the reason I involved a son, so students could relate to communicating with an older person. That's storytelling. And then you would go along and do your lesson. Okay. Now, if you wanted to introduce aesthetics in the first part of the lesson, for my real younger ones, I have a thumbs up and thumbs down approach. For the upper grades, the questions would be a little bit more sophisticated. But I really like the young ones. I would introduce the paintings and talk about a little bit and tell them to look more closely at it and everything that you see in there. And I'd say, if you like the painting, put your thumb up. If you don't like the painting, thumb down. And so you could go around and you would ask the students, "Why do you like the painting?" "Ah, you like flowers. Great. And why do you like the painting?" "Oh, you like the colors of the flowers. Great. Oh, you don't like the painting? Why is that?" "Ah, you think they stink. Okay." So this, what you're looking for is you're looking for a feeling response from your audience, from your students. And that's a very positive approach for the young ones. And our last principle to talk about is art criticism. It's essentially these 4 questions, which is a Feldman approach. It's called the Feldman method. In kids' language, it's what do you see? What's the story? Do you think the artist did a good job? And what colors, lines, or shapes did the artist use the most? In other words, we're talking about interpretation, judgment, analysis. Now, this particular principle takes a little time, and knowing about time scheduling in schools, I suggest this is used for more upper grades. So what I have introduced today is a process where, based upon the subject matter of your lesson, you search for a work of art that corresponds to that, okay? You keep the history, the information about it. Decide which principle you'd like to use. If you'd like to use a discussion, so you could select art history, storytelling, aesthetics, questions, or art criticism based upon the grade level. Or you would like to wait and have an art project that is concerned with creativity and imagination for the students to express in the art project using the very simple approach of criteria, art language, demonstration with directions for steps and a checklist. That's what I'm suggesting. And I'd really like my listeners today to try this format. Now, if you need further information, when I was teaching the education majors at Kennesaw, and I mentioned they discontinued the course, I wrote this book, and it has additional information on the Feldman approach and the principles. In fact, the season, this one work of art was used, and I wrote an example of a unit where you could use one work of art, and within each of the lessons, you would choose one of the principles to go into science, one of the principles into language arts, one of the principles into math, one of the principles into social studies. Now, the book that I was mentioning, Art for the Elementary Educator, as you can see at the top, it contains the 4 principles that we're talking about. It also talks about art styles. It has many art projects that are integrated. I taught rhymes. I taught my elementary students the elements and principles of art using rhymes. And there is a list of activities that engage the brain, and art projects, rhymes, movement, storytelling. There's a list of them that tells you if you use these, the brain loves to hear it or do it, and it goes into long-term memory for students. What I am really proud of is that all of the artwork that is in the book is done by students in the public schools. And there's an art history section, and that artwork was done by my education majors at Kennesaw. I wrote the book from the viewpoint of a classroom teacher. 20 days in the life of a school. I had invented characters. I invented teachers from kindergarten to 5th. I invented a principal. I invented an art teacher. And the funny part is that my students, my education majors, I would say, read the introduction, where it explained my approach. And you can tell the ones that didn't, because they thought all the principal and all the teachers were real. So you can see the quality of the work done by these students. This is outer space invention. Under the sea, you can say this is day 4. Day 2, day 5 dealt with even photography at the elementary level. And here on day 3, there was a Wednesday workshop. Remember those Wednesday workshops? Connecting the dots. The art teacher is presenting a workshop about integration of art in the classroom. The most concern is the amount of time. If you find that you taught a lesson and you wanted to do an art project, it's important that you think about Friday afternoon, after lunch, when everybody wants to head out. It's a great time to have students do art projects. The hands are moving, the voices are off. In fact, there was this one story I heard about. This was after school, and in the cafeteria, there were about 50 students. And the principal came into the cafeteria and he noticed that it was really quiet, very quiet. And he goes over to the teacher who's there supervising and says, what's going on? And the teacher looks at him and smiles and said, they're doing art. So I think that the book, if you're interested, this is a link to Kendall Hunt. I think that if you try this approach of incorporating art plus some questions or activity within your lessons, I think you will see how students respond. And that's what I would like, is feedback. If you try this, use the art education at tds.net and give me feedback. Tell me how, if you liked it, if something didn't work right, or if you want some suggestions. I'm available at that email address. And as I close up this presentation, one of the most important elements of this presentation, if you noticed, is that we need to encourage our students to keep their creativity and imagination, because they're our future. They're our inventors. They are our astronauts, our tech people, our future artists and musicians. It's important that not only do we teach content, but we preserve with our students their imagination and creativity. Now, I would like to answer any of the questions that you might have. Bailey, are you there?
Yep. Thank you, Jeanette. And yes, we will open it up now to any questions, comments, using the chat functions of Zoom here. And we did have one question come in beforehand when you were touching on the art history and storytelling.
Yes.
Rudia had asked, can I use this strategy in child and adolescent in college?
Any type of storytelling. Oh, yes. If you can do some research on how the brain learns, the storytelling goes right into the brain, and the children have an emotional connection, and so they remember the content. And that's one way I taught the elements and principles of art, of making stories, or about an artist, and I would tell a story about them. Definitely try this approach and get back with me. Let me know if it worked, or if you needed some suggestions. I'm available.
Awesome. And Shauna had asked, do you think it would be possible to incorporate art into the high school and curriculum?
I knew that was going to come up, and I thought about that. I think so. If you're, let me put it this way. I've been doing a lot of research, and I've come across, for instance, we're talking maybe about electricity, whatnot, and you're thinking, what kind of image, in science and talking about electricity would I come across? Believe it or not, the amount of resources, visual resources, to motivate students to relate a work of art to what they're learning. I was flabbergasted. I'm learning so much more about what's out there. And I think that as an educator, if you try this approach and you put in your content, you're going to have images up that can relate to it. And I think it's very valid to try it at the high school level, even though also there's an art teacher, and conferring with the art teacher, I'm teaching this subject matter. Do you have any suggestion of an artist that I might use? In fact, I think if you try this approach and do your research, you're going to go on a journey of discovery as to artwork. And not only is it going to support what you want to teach, but also personal awareness and aesthetic experiences that you'll have as you're going through and viewing all the images and artwork that's been created through time and space. I hope that answered that question.
Yes, thank you. And another question we had was, what has motivated you on picking your themes throughout your classroom lessons?
Let's see. Based upon a lot of the reading that I did and the research that I did, and brain-based research, a thematic approach, I found that students could see the connections. And so I used my travel and brought back the images that I could put into storytelling for a thematic year-long program. I would develop cultural programs. I would develop such as my trip to China, to Turkey, to Peru, to South Korea. I used the images and storytelling to do year-long themes. And I knew it was working because one student came up to me one day and said, "What's our theme next year?" And so I also discovered, as I developed the thematic approach, it had an organic quality, an organic life on its own, and it just evolved and became more in depth. And I was always appreciative when I would see classroom teams get together in the same grade level and look at thematic. So my travels was, I think, a major part. My love of history and my love of integration. For instance, when I taught Paleolithic art, I introduced archaeology. I had a dig in my art room. When we learned about Greece, I introduced them to the philosophers, Aristotle's, Plato, Socrates. I also made rhymes. I'm a rhymer because rhyming goes into the students' brain. The brain loves to hear that. So I think my integration and seeing all the connections and my travels have influenced a lot of how I taught. And I recommend, if you're young and you're single, or even if you have some time during the summers, travel. I hope that helped.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette.
Okay.
Yeah, and Brooke has asked, how do we get children interested in art in today's world with this being a technology strong world?
Yes, we know. We know. Well, the you can use the research depending on grade level. Okay, this would be a little for the upper grade levels. I would give them the task of here's our subject matter. I want you to find a work of art in the computer, because kids have all the resources for computers to find a picture that goes along with this. You could use it that way, using technology for them to answer that question of what image goes with this subject matter. If you start young enough by introducing, I'm talking about kindergarten level, introducing a work of art, they'll be used to it. For instance, when my early days of teaching, I always had classical music on. Beethoven was my favorite because it worked great with the brain. And I know I was successful because one day I forgot to put it on, and a student says, "Where's Beethoven?" So if you start young enough, they will develop an inner appreciation of the arts. For instance, my first graders that I was teaching, I had a theme: see an artist, be an artist. And I would say today is story day. And I would introduce the artist, okay? And I would have the picture. I'd have a geography image in the back where he was from. Sometimes I would introduce some language. For instance, Nanju Pai, who was a South Korean artist. And I would show this information, and I would teach them a thank you, 안녕하세요. We would practice the language, and then I would use what I introduced to you today. I would introduce works of art and ask the thumbs up, thumbs down, aesthetics. I would ask, what is the story? I would ask, if you wanted to change something in the painting, what would you? And we would always end with an art project. So that is the basis. And that's why having an art educator in every school is important, because I think that will balance out all this electronic stuff that's going on.
Right. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and comments. Just as a reminder, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you in the coming days, and we will also provide you a link with the product page if you are interested in taking a further look in Jeanette's book. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.